In today's episode, we're exploring 5 dumb people who got killed by animals, from a man who tried to tame a wild wolf to a tourist who climbed into a lion enclosure. Let's begin with the first story, where one wildlife enthusiast's plan to befriend a predator ended in tragedy. It was November 12, 2014, and the first snow of winter dusted the remote forest on federally managed land bordering Yellowstone National Park. Just outside the park's protected boundaries, as 32-year-old Brandon Kellerman set up his elaborate bait system in a clearing 2 miles from the nearest trail. Brandon had become obsessed with wolves after watching nature documentaries and reading books about wolf behavior. His apartment in Seattle was filled with wolf memorabilia, training manuals, and equipment he'd purchased online. He'd spent thousands of dollars on heavy-duty cages, tranquilizer equipment he'd obtained through questionable channels, and what he believed were humane snares. Brandon had convinced himself that wolves were simply misunderstood dogs that needed the right handler. His plan was simple: lure a young wolf with bait, use his tranquilizer equipment to sedate it, transport it to a secure location he'd prepared on rented property, and spend months gaining its trust through feeding and positive reinforcement. Gray wolves are apex predators, with adult males typically weighing between 100 and 130 pounds, though some individuals can reach slightly higher weights. These highly intelligent pack animals possess powerful jaws capable of crushing bone and inflicting deep puncture wounds, making any close encounter with humans potentially lethal, despite their natural tendency to avoid people. Wolves are territorial and defensive of their pack and territory, capable of inflicting serious injuries when they feel threatened or cornered. While wolves generally avoid humans and fatal attacks are extremely rare, attempting to trap or handle wild wolves without proper authorization is both illegal and can trigger defensive aggression. Brandon had set up what he believed was an effective bait station with raw meat, positioning himself in a camouflaged blind about 50 yards away where he could monitor the area and prepare his tranquilizer equipment. What Brandon didn't understand was that wolves in this area traveled in packs, and that his bait would attract multiple animals, not the single young wolf he'd hoped to capture. A pack of 6 wolves approached the clearing just before dusk, drawn by the scent of the bait Brandon had placed. The alpha male, a 120-pound gray wolf, immediately recognized the artificial nature of the bait setup and circled the area cautiously. The moment Brandon stepped into the open, the alpha male spotted him. The wolf's posture changed instantly from cautious to defensive, its ears flattening and lips pulling back to reveal massive canines. The pack began displaying agitated behavior, circling and vocalizing as they assessed this unexpected human threat. Realizing the situation he is in, he reached for the bear spray on his belt, but his hands were shaking so badly he fumbled with the safety clip. The alpha male launched a warning rush toward Brandon, closing half the distance in explosive bursts before stopping and retreating, attempting to drive the human away. Brandon panicked and turned to run, his sudden flight triggering a more aggressive defensive response. The alpha charged again in a rapid defensive rush. The alpha wolf struck Brandon's leg and lower back area with a quick defensive bite before immediately releasing and backing away. The force of the encounter and Brandon's panicked stumbling caused him to trip and fall hard against a partially buried rock, resulting in severe head trauma and cervical spine injury from the impact. The entire pack had disengaged and moved away from the clearing within seconds, their defensive behavior satisfied once the perceived threat was incapacitated. The encounter itself had lasted less than 10 seconds, but Brandon's injuries from the fall were catastrophic. Brandon lay bleeding in the snow, unable to move due to the spinal injury from his fall. The combination of traumatic head injury, cervical spine damage, and the rapidly dropping temperatures created a fatal situation. He remained conscious for several minutes before losing consciousness from shock and hypothermia. Brandon had told no one his exact location, parking his vehicle at a remote turnout miles from any main road, and an unexpected early blizzard that night made search efforts impossible until weather cleared. He was discovered 4 days later by county search and rescue personnel who had been alerted by his abandoned vehicle. The investigation revealed Brandon's illegal equipment and his detailed journals outlining his plan to capture and tame a wild wolf. Wildlife officials emphasized that wolves are protected species and that attempting to trap or domesticate them is a federal crime. The medical examiner determined that Brandon had died primarily from traumatic head and spinal injuries sustained in the fall, with hypothermia significantly contributing to his death. Brandon's death was ruled as the result of his own illegal and reckless actions. Yet Brandon's fatal attempt to tame a wild predator was not the only time someone's misguided confidence would lead them into a deadly encounter. In Florida, a homeowner's decision to bring wildlife into his living space would prove equally catastrophic. It was July 3, 2016, and the oppressive Florida heat hung over the suburban neighborhood of Port Charlotte as 41-year-old Donald Reeves carried an 8-foot alligator through his front door and into his living room. The construction worker had found the gator in a drainage canal behind his property, and, despite Florida's strict laws against keeping alligators without permits, decided that the reptile would make an interesting pet that would impress his friends during the upcoming 4th of July barbecue. Donald had grown up in Florida and had what he considered extensive experience with alligators, having seen them regularly throughout his life in canals, ponds, and golf courses. This familiarity had bred a dangerous contempt for the reptile's predatory nature. He'd caught small gators as a teenager and had convinced himself that they were manageable if you knew how to handle them. Donald set up what he believed was an adequate enclosure in his garage, a large plastic pool surrounded by plywood barriers. He fed the alligator raw chicken, which he'd named Chomper. American alligators of this size possess tremendously powerful jaws and razor-sharp teeth, making them capable of inflicting catastrophic injuries if handled or provoked. Alligators are not domesticable animals and do not form bonds with humans regardless of feeding or handling. They are ambush predators with lightning-fast reflexes and will attack when they perceive an opportunity or feel threatened. Over the next 3 weeks, Donald had been feeding the reptile heavily, providing multiple meals per day in the warm garage environment, which increased its strength and aggression significantly. He began allowing the reptile more freedom, letting it roam his garage and even bringing it into his house for short periods. Donald's girlfriend had moved out after discovering the alligator, warning him that his obsession would get him killed. On the evening of July 24th, Donald had been drinking beer while watching television when he decided to bring Chomper into the living room to take photos for social media. Donald placed the alligator on his living room floor and knelt beside it to take a selfie, holding a beer in one hand while reaching towards the gator with the other. The moment Donald's hand came within range, the alligator's head whipped around with explosive speed, its jaws clamping onto Donald's forearm with crushing force. Donald screamed and tried to pull away, but the alligator's grip was absolute. The reptile began thrashing violently, using its powerful neck muscles to pull Donald off balance. Donald fell forward, and the alligator immediately went into a death roll, spinning its body while maintaining its grip. The rotational force dislocated Donald's shoulder and tore massive chunks of flesh from his forearm, causing severe bleeding. The confined space of the living room, combined with the bright lights, loud television, and Donald's screaming, created an overstimulating environment that kept the alligator in a heightened state of aggression. Donald's screams brought neighbors running to his front door, but by the time they arrived, the alligator had pulled the weakening Donald across portions of the living room floor, leaving a trail of blood. Neighbors began pounding on the door and windows, shouting and trying to distract the animal. One neighbor threw a potted plant through the window, hoping the noise would startle the reptile, while another attempted to open the front door, but found it locked. Their efforts only seemed to agitate the alligator further. The reptile released Donald's mangled arm and immediately lunged for a new target, its jaws clamping onto Donald's thigh. The alligator's teeth penetrated deep into the muscle, causing catastrophic vascular damage to the upper thigh, including rupture of major blood vessels. Blood began pouring from the wound at an alarming rate. The alligator continued thrashing as it maintained its grip. Donald's struggles weakened rapidly as blood loss from both wounds took its toll. Neighbors called 911, but the alligator's continued aggression prevented anyone from safely entering the house. By the time wildlife officers arrived with proper equipment, Donald had lost consciousness from massive blood loss. The officers used catch poles and shields to control the reptile. Once secured, paramedics rushed in and worked frantically to stabilize Donald applying tourniquets and pressure bandages, but the damage to his femoral artery proved fatal. Donald was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation revealed that Donald had been keeping the alligator illegally for nearly a month. The heavy feeding regimen and warm conditions had increased the reptile's strength and aggression. The alligator was euthanized. Officials used Donald's case in public safety campaigns. However, Donald's fatal decision to keep a wild alligator in his home was not the only time someone's reckless disregard for an animal's dangerous nature would prove deadly. In Alaska, a tourist's determination to get close to wildlife would lead him into a fatal encounter with one of North America's most dangerous animals. It was September 18th, 2015, and the autumn colors blazed across Denali National Park as 26-year-old Trevor Hoffman hiked alone along a popular trail, determined to capture close-up wildlife footage for his channel. The aspiring social media influencer from Los Angeles had arrived in Alaska 3 days earlier with expensive camera equipment and a dangerous lack of understanding about the wildlife he was so eager to film. Trevor's channel focused on extreme outdoor adventures by taking increasingly dangerous risks for dramatic footage. His previous videos showed him approaching bison in Yellowstone, getting within feet of bears in the Smokies, and ignoring park ranger warnings at multiple locations. Trevor had spent the morning hiking through prime moose habitat, and he'd already filmed several moose from what park guidelines considered safe distances. But Trevor wasn't satisfied with distant shots that looked like every other tourist's photos. He wanted footage that would go viral, content that would set him apart from other wildlife channels. When he spotted a massive bull moose feeding in a willow thicket about 100 yards from the trail, Trevor saw his opportunity. Moose are the largest members of the deer family, with adult bulls weighing up to 1,500 pounds and standing over 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Despite their ungainly appearance, moose are extremely dangerous animals, particularly during fall rutting season, when bulls are aggressive and territorial. In many years, moose are responsible for more human injuries and fatalities in Alaska than bears, using their powerful hooves to stomp perceived threats. Park guidelines mandate maintaining at least 30 yards distance from moose, and rangers emphasize that moose attacks are often fatal due to the animal's size and power. Trevor left the designated trail and began approaching the feeding moose, his camera rolling as he approached. He'd researched moose behavior online and convinced himself that he could read the animal's body language well enough to know when to stop. The bull moose was in full rut, its massive antlers spanning nearly 6 feet, and it had been displaying aggressive behavior toward other bulls in the area all morning. Trevor managed to close the distance to about 30 feet before the moose noticed his presence. The massive bull raised its head and stared directly at Trevor, its ears flattening against its skull in the classic warning display that Trevor either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. He even took several steps closer, wanting to capture the moose's impressive antlers in greater detail. The moose's attack was sudden and devastating. The massive bull charged, closing the 30 feet with shocking speed. Trevor had time only to raise his arms defensively before 1,400 pounds of enraged moose crashed into him with tremendous force. The impact lifted Trevor off his feet and drove him backward into a tree trunk, the collision breaking several ribs and causing immediate internal injuries. The moose didn't stop with the initial charge. Using its powerful front hooves, the bull began stomping Trevor, each strike delivering crushing force to his chest and abdomen. Trevor's screams echoed through the forest as the moose continued its assault, driven by territorial aggression and rutting season hormones that made it exceptionally dangerous. The attack lasted approximately 40 seconds before the moose finally backed away, leaving Trevor broken and bleeding on the forest floor. Trevor remained conscious for several minutes, unable to move due to massive internal injuries and the crushing trauma inflicted by the impact and repeated blows. Hikers discovered Trevor's body 2 hours later. Park rangers located the aggressive bull moose and monitored it, but determined that it had exhibited normal defensive behavior and did not need to be destroyed. The footage was used in the investigation, and it revealed that Trevor had ignored multiple warning signs posted along the trail about moose danger during rutting season. Park officials used Trevor's case in safety presentations, emphasizing that moose are not docile animals and that approaching them for photos or videos can be fatal. Yet Trevor's fatal decision to approach a dangerous animal for social media content was not the only time someone's reckless disregard for safety protocols would prove deadly. In South Africa, a tourist's determination to break the rules would place him face to face with one of Africa's apex predators. It was March 22, 2017, and the afternoon sun beat down on the Lion Park Wildlife Reserve outside Johannesburg as 34-year-old Pierre Dubois stood at the fence of the lion enclosure, calculating whether he could climb over without being noticed by staff. The French tourist had paid for a standard safari tour, but was frustrated by the distance maintained between visitors and the lions. Pierre had been drinking wine during lunch at the park's restaurant, and his judgment was impaired by both alcohol and his inflated sense of his own capabilities. He'd spent the morning bragging to other tourists about his extensive travel experience and his fearlessness around animals. When the tour guide explained that visitors must remain in vehicles or behind barriers at all times, Pierre rolled his eyes. The lion enclosure housed 6 adult lions, including 2 massive males and 4 females. The pride had been fed earlier in the day and appeared relaxed, lounging in the shade of acacia trees about 50 yards from the viewing fence. African lions are apex predators that can weigh up to 500 pounds and possess the strength to kill buffalo and giraffes. Male lions are particularly dangerous, with powerful jaws capable of delivering crushing bites and claws that can disembowel prey with single swipes. Pierre waited until the tour guide was distracted before approaching a section of fence, partially hidden by dense vegetation. This area had been identified in recent maintenance reports as needing reinforcement, with some fence posts showing signs of wear and providing easier footholds. The fence was 8 feet tall, with warning signs, but the overgrown vegetation had obscured some signage and created a blind spot. Pierre found the compromised section and began climbing, his movements clumsy due to alcohol impairment. The vegetation concealed his actions from staff members. Pierre managed to get over the fence and drop into the enclosure, landing awkwardly and stumbling forward. The sound immediately caught the attention of the nearest lioness, who raised her head and stared directly at him. Pierre froze as he saw the lioness rise to her feet. The other lions also stood, their attention now focused on the human intruder. Pierre began backing toward the fence, his hands raised. The lioness began stalking toward him, her body low to the ground, and her eyes locked onto Pierre with predatory focus. Pierre turned to run for the fence, triggering the chase instinct. The lioness covered the distance in seconds, her powerful legs propelling her forward with explosive speed. She struck Pierre from behind, her weight and momentum driving him face first into the ground. Her front claws raked across Pierre's back and shoulders, tearing through clothing and flesh as she used her weight to pin him down. Pierre screamed and tried to roll away, but the lioness's jaws clamped onto his throat, her powerful bite applying crushing pressure that cut off his air supply. Pierre's struggles became more desperate as he fought for breath, his hands clawing at the lioness's head in a futile attempt to break free. The lioness maintained her suffocating grip on his throat, her canine teeth penetrating deep into the soft tissue, while her body weight kept Pierre pinned. Blood began flowing from the puncture wounds as the bite crushed vital structures in Pierre's neck. The other lions, initially watching from a distance, began moving toward the commotion. As Pierre's struggles weakened, 2 more lionesses approached and joined the attack. Their claws inflicted additional trauma to Pierre's torso and limbs. Pierre's screams had been reduced to gurgling sounds as the initial lioness's grip prevented normal breathing. The attack continued for several minutes as Pierre's body went through its final convulsions. The combination of suffocation from the throat bite, massive blood loss from the claw wounds, and the crushing weight of multiple lions proved fatal. By the time park staff realized what was happening and responded with vehicles and loud noises, Pierre had already died from asphyxiation and blood loss. The entire incident had lasted for 5 minutes. The investigation revealed that Pierre had been legally intoxicated and had ignored multiple warning signs and verbal safety briefings. The lions were not destroyed, as officials determined they had exhibited normal predatory behavior, The park implemented enhanced security measures, including immediate repairs to the compromised fence section, vegetation clearing, taller fences, and increased staff monitoring. However, Pierre's fatal decision to enter a lion enclosure was not the only time someone's determination to ignore warnings would prove deadly. In Indonesia, a tourist's refusal to follow local guidance would lead him into the territory of one of the world's largest and most dangerous reptiles. It was August 9th, 2018, and the tropical heat shimmered over Komodo National Park as 42-year-old James Mitchell separated from his tour group to explore what he believed was a more interesting trail. The Australian businessman had paid for a guided tour of the park, but was frustrated by what he considered the guide's overcautious approach and slow pace. James wanted to see Komodo dragons up close, not from the safe distances the guide maintained. James had extensive hiking experience in Australia and considered himself an expert outdoorsman. He dismissed the guide's warnings about Komodo dragons as exaggerations designed to keep tourists dependent on guides. When the group stopped for lunch at a designated safe area, James quietly slipped away down a trail that the guide had specifically warned was off-limits due to high dragon activity. The trail led through dense brush into an area where Komodo dragons were known to hunt and feed. James had researched the dragons online and convinced himself that their reputation was overblown. He'd read that they were primarily scavengers and that attacks on humans were rare. Komodo dragons are the world's largest lizards, with adults reaching lengths of 10 feet and weights exceeding 300 pounds. These apex predators possess serrated teeth and venomous saliva containing anticoagulant compounds that prevent blood clotting and cause severe shock in bite victims. They can run up to 12 miles per hour in short bursts and have been known to attack water buffalo, deer, and occasionally humans. James had been walking for about 20 minutes when he spotted a large Komodo dragon lying in dappled shade about 30 feet from the trail. The dragon appeared to be resting, its massive body motionless except for the slow rise and fall of its breathing. James was thrilled by the opportunity to photograph the dragon at close range without the guide's interference. James approached slowly, his camera raised, believing that the dragon's apparent rest meant it was unaware of his presence. What James didn't understand was that Komodo dragons often appear inactive while actually monitoring their surroundings carefully through their acute sense of smell. James managed to get within 15 feet of the dragon before it moved. The massive reptile exploded into motion with shocking speed, its powerful legs propelling its 250-pound body forward in a charge that covered the distance in startling speed. The dragon's jaws clamped onto his left thigh, its serrated teeth tearing through muscle and severing major blood vessels. The dragon's bite force, combined with its thrashing head movements, caused massive tissue damage and arterial bleeding. Anticoagulant compounds in the dragon's saliva rapidly worsened the bleeding and began driving James into shock. James screamed and tried to pull away, but the dragon maintained its grip while its claws raked across his legs and lower abdomen. James managed to break free from the dragon's grip and stumbled backward, but the damage was catastrophic. Blood poured from the deep lacerations on his thigh, and the anticoagulant compounds in the dragon's venom prevented the wounds from clotting properly. The Komodo dragon didn't pursue James after the initial attack. Instead, it remained in the area, monitoring the situation from a distance as James attempted to move away. James managed to walk about 50 yards back toward the main trail before blood loss and the effects of the venom-induced shock caused him to collapse. The tour guide discovered James was missing during a head count after lunch and immediately organized a search. They found James unconscious on the trail an hour after the attack, with the Komodo dragon still in the vicinity. Park rangers drove the dragon away and called for emergency medical evacuation, but James had lost massive amounts of blood and was in severe shock. James died during helicopter transport to the nearest hospital, roughly 3 hours after the initial attack. The medical team noted that with immediate medical intervention at the time of the bite, survival might have been possible. However, the 90-minute delay before discovery, combined with the severity of the arterial damage and the anticoagulant effects of the venom had made his injuries unsurvivable. The investigation revealed that James had deliberately separated from his tour group and ignored multiple warning signs. The Komodo dragon was not destroyed, as it had exhibited normal defensive and hunting behavior. Park officials used James's case to emphasize the importance of following guide instructions. Thanks for watching. Click the next video for more stories.